are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about the girl who disappeared in a blizzard. This is the Susan Swedell case, unsolved. Now, there are so many clues that lead up to her disappearance, and so many descriptions and witnesses, and yet so many years later, there are still no answers. What happened to Susan? Where is she now? Those are the questions we may never have answers to. By the way, I post so much true crime content like this. I am doing Suspect Summer, so that's a lot of content in July, so make sure to subscribe if that's something you're interested in. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1988 in Minnesota, and a 19-year-old Susan Ann Swedell lived in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. She was said to be a funny and beautiful young woman who loved music and actually went to church to sing in the choir most times. Her favorite band was Simon and Garfunkel, which she loved to listen to with her friends. And at the time when she was 19, she was kind of having a little more of a hard time finding where she belonged in life. As all people around their 20s do, she wasn't really sure exactly what she wanted out of life, but she was an extremely bubbly, fun person to be around. She could also be a little naive. But Susan was still a very level-headed, responsible young woman. She could speak Spanish, and she also was studying psychology before she decided that she actually wanted to just do work and live back at home for a while to kind of just figure herself out. That's kind of what I got, was that she was a 19-year-old that just didn't know exactly what she wanted and was trying to figure it out, which I think is completely okay. But while she was doing so, she actually worked 2 different jobs, both at a St. Croix mall, which was in Oak Park Heights, Minnesota, which was about 11 minutes from her home in Lake Elmo. Now, both of these stores that she worked at were called Body and Soul, which was a clothing store, and also Kmart. And on January 19th, 1998, she was working at the Kmart job, and at around 9 p.m. was her ending shift, and she was getting ready to go, but she had called her mom previously and just kind of talked to her about coming home to watch a movie with her later, and saying that she might be a little late actually because there was a huge blizzard happening outside. And for people in Minnesota, that's kind of normal. I mean, it's still obviously a little scary to drive in, especially if you're not that experienced, but it's something that is normal and not like, you know, a tornado or a hurricane coming in. Her mother even told her to possibly go to her dad's house, which was closer because her parents were divorced and had been a few years. So her mom told her, just go to your dad's, it's closer, you'll be safe. But she really didn't want to do that. She said, I'll be fine, I'll just be a little late, but I'll be home. But after she got off the phone with her mother and it was the end of her shift, Susan went and changed clothes. Now, she had worn kind of a red pantsuit to work, and I don't believe that Kmart had any uniforms to wear. This was kind of just something that she wanted to wear, a red pantsuit, and she had changed out of that and put on a mini skirt. And yeah, you might just want to change from your work clothes to regular clothes, but going out in a blizzard, I would rather wear pants than a skirt, wouldn't you? And that's something that her coworkers noticed, and they kind of didn't say much. Of course, it's none of their business, but when Susan started to go outside without even a coat on, her manager turned to her and basically told her that she was going to be cold and told her how cold it actually was outside. And Susan didn't really seem to care all that much, and she still decided to go out in a mini skirt without a coat. You see, Susan was kind of more of a person to dress to impress rather than dress for comfort, which I, for one, completely agree with. I will always rather dress in something that I feel confident in rather than just feeling comfortable, but I know people can go the complete opposite. I see how it could go either way, like that was strange or that was completely normal depending on how you were. You see, Susan's mother, Kathy, had to calm her down to actually drive in this storm because she was super anxious about it. She wasn't driving that long before she had to drive in a blizzard, and she was a little freaked out, but her mom told her it was going to be okay. She could always stop and call on a payphone if anything went wrong, if she needed anything, because of course there were no cell phones back then. But her mother informed her she was going to be okay, and so she felt confident enough to go. Unfortunately, her car would be the reason that she wouldn't get very far, because her car would break down on her. You see, it was a maroon 1975 Oldsmobile Cutlass, and it only made it to a gas station on Manning Avenue North and Highway 5, and this was like on the corner of it, which was only about a mile from her mom's home. But Susan went inside after this to ask the attendant if it was okay if she left her car there due to car troubles. Apparently it had been overheating on her on the way there. But Susan would actually not just sit in her car and wait for help. She would be picked up by an unidentified male. And when she never returned home later that evening, her mother called the police department to report her as missing, and investigators found her car at that very gas station. Except by the time they got there, the gas station was actually closed and the attendant inside was gone, so they had to wait till the next morning to talk to them. When they did, this attendant actually had a lot more information, thankfully, than they expected them to. They could even say what this man looked like, what the vehicle looked like, to the best of their ability. Of course, it was snowing outside, so it was a little harder to see, but they did have a lot of information. This attendant said that this was a tall male who was unshaven with shoulder-length, curly, sandy brown hair, a well-built physique, and a 5 o'clock shadow. He was wearing a leather jacket, and his vehicle he was driving was a light-colored, older model with sports wheels, and it was dirty, but it was still in good shape. Now, apparently these two, Susan and this male, were outside talking for quite a while, and they appeared as if they knew each other, which was why the attendant didn't, have any alarm bells going off or anything. They were just talking like they knew each other. And then the male actually went to fill up his car with gas, and they came inside to pay for the gas, and the attendant didn't remember what the conversation they were having was about, but that is when Susan asked about her car to stay there, and the attendant said yeah, she could leave it there, and they left in his car, headed westbound, and that was the direction of Susan's house. Now, when the investigators searched Susan's car that was still at the gas station, they found her glasses, her license, and her purse still in the car, which is extremely odd to me because I feel like if you're going to leave your car, and in fact I just had my car break down and had to get it towed, and I was definitely not going to leave my purse in there no matter if I had someone picking me up or not. That's just not something you do when you're just going to leave it somewhere and not know when you're going to come back for it. And also her glasses were extremely needed because she was very nearsighted and could not see a thing without them. So why would she not want to wear them unless she was doing it to impress? Without her glasses, maybe she thought she was better looking without them. But her car was taken to the Lake Elmo repair shop, where the mechanic quickly came across the problem, and that was that the petcock on the radiator had been loosened, and it of course was making water leak from it, and it was overheating because of this. But for this to be loosened was very uncommon. It was almost as if you would need someone to go in there and loosen it themselves for this to happen. It's not completely unknown and unheard of for them to do it on their own, but it is strange. And investigators feared after hearing this that possibly someone had tampered with her car and followed her there to end up offering her a ride possibly, and then ended up doing something horrible. But Susan was still missing, and they were searching every road, every ditch, just thinking that possibly she just walked home knowing that she couldn't get a ride, or maybe she didn't really get with this male and she just walked home. So they searched everywhere, but they weren't finding her. And so missing persons posters went up and said that Susan was a Caucasian female with sandy brown hair and hazel eyes. She stood at 5'4" and 100 pounds when she was 19, with pierced ears and extensive dental work. Susan was nicknamed Sue and wore glasses due to being very nearsighted and couldn't see well without them. At the time of her disappearance, Susan was wearing a short skirt, a sweater, a black down jacket, and earrings. Now, Susan did attend the University of Wisconsin for 2 semesters before deciding that it wasn't really what she wanted to do at the time. She wanted to go and be back with her family, her mom and her sister, and live with them and work for a while. And because she lived with them, a few days after her disappearance, her mother and sister believed that she had been back at their apartment. And this was the strangest possible thing in this case to happen, and baffles me every time I read about it. Now, when her family came home, they had a spare key that was on a shelf right next to the door, and it was moved, and there are conflicting statements on how far it was moved. I read one that it was just moved like to a corner of the shelf, and one that it was like in a box in the yard completely far away. But either way, this key was allegedly moved, and there was only her mom and her sister living there, and they had both been gone that day, and her sister Christine came back home before her mother and found that the key was missing. She found the key, however, went inside, and noticed the smell of smoke, that it was almost like marijuana. And this was kind of alarming to her, but not too horribly, until she looked in the kitchen sink. Now, when Christine left that morning, she had put, of course, her own dishes in the sink, but she had been the last to leave. Now, coming back, the first person home, there were more dishes in the sink, and she hadn't placed them there. However, when her mother came home, it would be the most confusing clue that had been found in this case, because her mother went into Susan's bedroom and found something rolled up, stuffed under her bed. The very red pantsuit she had been wearing to work that day. And like I said, this wasn't a uniform, so it's not like they had multiples. It was something that she just had to wear on her own, and normally you don't have matching pantsuits in the same color. Now, Susan was still nowhere to be seen. She wasn't in the home, and the police never came to check for her fingerprints or anything, so it's still unknown if she was ever there at all. Now, of course, the family was asked if there was any behavior changes in the weeks prior to her disappearance, and the only thing they could really come up with was the fact that Susan was talking to a lot of boys on the phone a few weeks prior, and the coworkers said that she was getting a lot of calls at work, and especially from a male named Dale. But nobody really knew who this Dale was, and in fact her mother had even wanted to talk to her about him because she had briefly mentioned him, but didn't get much out of her. And her coworkers would say many different things about her plans that night, because apparently they had heard many different things. One of them being that she was going to meet her ex-boyfriend that night, but he canceled because of the weather. And another coworker said that she was actually going on a new date with a new male who was a stripper that she was very excited about meeting, whose name was Dale. Yet another coworker said she was going to meet up with some college friends just to hang out. Now, all of these make sense as to why she would want to change into a miniskirt, but it was never confirmed which one it was. Nobody knows what she was actually doing that night. You know, at first Susan was thought to be a runaway, and there was very little information because there was no surveillance footage at the Kmart or at this gas station, because it was so far in the past. Of course, there wasn't much surveillance footage anywhere. But the problem was police didn't do very well either back then, and they didn't get very many statements, especially at first, and when they did, it wasn't very good. They didn't go extensively into looking into exactly what had happened, exactly what witnesses saw or heard or knew. But 10 years later, they would interrogate the attendant at the gas station once again. And this time, because it had been so many years, the gas station attendant said that the car looked completely different than it did in the original statement, because now they were saying that the car was a dark colored, possibly LTD style Chevrolet Impala that was possibly late 70s or early 80s. And in 2002, investigators were still looking into this case, now looking at possible suspects, because something that was found in Susan's bedroom was lots of names of males written on her dresser, on post-it notes, and they really wanted to look into these men and if they had a connection to her disappearance. Now, when they tracked one of these males' names back to Phoenix, Arizona many years later, they questioned him, and all of the investigators saw that he was very suspicious. They really felt that he had something to do with it, or was at least guilty of something, and so they brought him back in to do a polygraph test, which he ended up failing, but they didn't have much to hold him on, especially so many years later, and had to let him go. You know, there were several men's names all around her room, and it was really thought that these were all from a chat line. Now, back in this time, there were chat lines that were often used by teenagers, and not those sexual, wanting to talk sexually on the phone type lines that we know of today. They were basically just like social media message or like group text, stuff like that, that teenagers could get on with a whole bunch of people, whether they knew them or not, and just kind of talk a little bit, and for however long they wanted at a cost. And so you could meet lots of different people, especially if that's what you wanted, and this could possibly be where she got a lot of these random numbers. Now, allegedly, the men that were written around the room were looked into, and none of them had anything to do with this disappearance, or so they ended up thinking, and they didn't believe that any of those were involved. So yet again, there were zero suspects really in this case, other than of course the male who drove away with her that nobody really knows who he is. I mean, could he have been someone from a chat line? Possibly. But the reason why Susan was thought to be on these chat lines is because just a few months prior, her boyfriend had broken up with her, or so it was said, except for her boyfriend claims that they were an on-again, off-again couple who never really officially broke up, and were still kind of together at the time. And that would kind of explain why one of the coworkers said she was going to meet her ex-boyfriend if they were an on-again, off-again couple. You know, you don't just meet your ex-boyfriend just to meet him. No one wants to do that. But her ex-boyfriend was 16, and he was looked into, of course, to see if he was involved at all, and they really didn't think he had any involvement whatsoever. But they did believe that it was more of a he wanted to be in a relationship and she really didn't. But something the police never looked into, or at least I couldn't find anything about, was that she was getting so many calls at her job at Kmart, and they never looked at the phone records there to see, you know, who this Dale was, if they could find his number and find him, if they could find any other possible calls she had gotten that day to say where she had actually gone or who she was going with. They never looked into those. There was 3 sightings of Susan throughout the years, one at a waterworks in Centerville, a Burger King at North Minneapolis, and a Hardee's in Ashland, Tennessee, but none of which actually led to finding Susan. In 2006, authorities actually got a hit on Susan's social security number, and of course her family was ecstatic, thinking that maybe they finally had something on her whereabouts. But unfortunately, it was stolen identity by a woman who was trying to join the military. Her mother and sister have now both put their DNA in missing persons databases in case an unidentified body ever comes up that kind of looks like Susan, that they could possibly see if it's a match. But they still haven't had any luck with that today. But still today, we have no idea what really happened to Susan. And I get that a lot of theories say maybe she really was a runaway because, you know, she was having a hard time and she was at that age where, you know, people do run away. She could have wanted to start a new life somewhere, possibly with a man she had met. But something that always just sticks in the back of my mind with that theory is her car trouble. How could she could stage a disappearance, she could stage all of that, but did she have this person she was going with stage her breakdown with her car too? I mean, I guess since it was loosened, that could be a possibility, but I think it would just be very hard to get a car to overheat and be at the exact gas station that you wanted to leave it at to run away. I mean, I guess now that I say it, I kind of see how that could be a possibility. Possibly if this male knew anything about cars, was a mechanic, and knew exactly how to get it to break down to a precise location to pick her up and take her away, whether that was willingly or not. But also, who could have been at her house a few days later to leave that red pantsuit? That is something that gives me actual chills to think about. That somebody could have been in that house and had her belongings. Was it her or was it not? And if she did go back, why did she bring nothing with her? She didn't bring her glasses, which she would need. She didn't bring her purse. She didn't take anything from the home to take with her. Nothing. And even if you're running away, I mean, you're going to need some basic things to start out with, especially at 19 with no money. And she hadn't even picked up her last check she had gotten. It was still at her work. You know, I do think that she was kind of a lost soul, as everybody around their 20s kind of is. But I do think for her to be a runaway, she would need to have been very, very persuaded by possibly a male she really liked, because she was very close with her mother and her sister, and I just think she wouldn't have been able to stay away for this long and not have contacted them by now. I would lean more towards that it was a boy she was going to meet up with, except for if this boy was going to meet up with her, she obviously probably wasn't going to meet up at a gas station. And then how did the boy know she was there? Because her car broke down, and for her to make it all the way to this gas station is a little strange of a coincidence for her to make it all the way to the exact location of the meetup, even though her car was breaking down. Although I know that just because it's overheating doesn't mean it's not going to run. It is very bad to drive on it when it is overheating, so I don't know. Would this date of hers just have known the precise location she was going to break down, or were they really going to meet at a gas station and she just thankfully made it there with her broken down car? That does make me wonder if it was possibly someone that was a co-worker or someone who had followed her from work who knew that she was going to break down, or who even just followed her and then when she did break down was there to offer her help. She was said to have a guy harassing her at her other job, body and soul, at her work, but I'm sure she wouldn't have been so friendly with someone she thought was harassing her at the gas station like she appeared to be. So I wonder if these investigators ever looked into if any of her coworkers matched the description that this gas station attendant gave. Maybe one of her coworkers had an obsession with her enough to sabotage her car, follow behind just to be, you know, a knight in shining armor to help her, and then took advantage of her. That's kind of, I don't know, especially with the coworkers and conflicting statements, that almost makes sense. Except if that was the case, why would she change into a miniskirt if she was just literally planning to head home and then her car broke down, unfortunately, and she had to get another ride? I don't know. It almost just, when she was there, it seems like she was just knew that the car was following her and knew she was going to get in with this guy already before she got there. I mean, I guess she could have had other plans, and then when her car broke down, she noticed that she knew this person and decided to get in with them just because they were being nice, and they kind of stopped her on her way to get to her actual plans, which would be why there are so many conflicting statements on what she was going to do that night. I mean, this case is truly maddening for something that appears to have zero clues, and yet we have a description of the male she went with and the car she got into, and yet nobody really knows what happened to them. Who that was, who that could have been. I don't know if that's chalked up to shoddy police work or just really no one knowing who it was, but I'm truly begging for your theories down below, because I don't know if I even came up with a solid one in there. It's just kind of, my mind is racing, it's going in circles, but nothing seems to really connect. But if you do have any information, please call the Washington County Sheriff's Office at 651-430-7810. And in 2018, a cold case unit was actually put together to work on this case, so I am hopeful that it will get solved, even if it has been so many years later. But this one just makes me so agitated, and I can't even imagine how her family members feel, especially her mom and her sister, who she was so incredibly close to, who are truly the reasons why I don't believe she was just a runaway. And maybe she did run away back then, but I think if she was still okay by now, she would have been in contact with them. And obviously that didn't happen, so I don't know. I'll leave you with that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.